and start recording.
Firas left now.
Firas, why did he leave?
هيني I'm gonna
Okay, let him. Okay. أهلا وسهلا فيكم في إنترنت الأشياء عالم آخر ممكن من تنظيم دارة الفنون مؤسسة خالد شومان. اليوم رح نكون موجودين مع الفنانين المقيمين سليمان مجالي، عمر عادل، بيان كيوان وجوليانا فاضل لاتشكف اللي رح يحدثونا عن مشاريعهم اللي طوروها في الشهرين الماضيين كجزء من برنامج الإقامة الفنية التابع لإنترنت الأشياء. ممكن تطلعوا على أعمالهم على الويب سايت وفي المنشور الجديد اللي أطلقناه اليوم بعنوان أنظمة مناعة وأجسام مضادة، وهو أيضاً موجود على الويب سايت كPDF ممكن تنزلوها عندكم على الكمبيوتر أو اللابتوب. أجهزة مناعة وأجسام مضادة هو تمرين في النشر أونلاين كممارسة فنية أو عمل تنسيق فني انطلاقاً من حالة الإصابة ونحو سياسة تعافي وشهادة مغايرة. اليوم ممكن نعتبر إنه المعرض وصل لصيغته الأخيرة، ولهيك بنحب نشكر بالإضافة لعمر وجوليانا وبيان وسليمان الفنانين اللي كانوا معنا بالصيغة الأولى: تمارا نصار، أحمد عصام الدين، أريج حنيتي، باعتبارنا كلنا بنينا هالمشروع سوا. وبما إنه اليوم افتتاح المعرض بأكمله، قلنا نرجع للحظة الأولى لإنترنت الأشياء اللي جسدت بالبيان تاع المشروع اللي كتبناه بشهر 3 لما تجلت حالة الطوارئ المرتبطة بالجائحة. القيمين رح يقرأوا البيان بالعربي وبالإنجليزي، ووراها رح نكمل مع الفنانين المقيمين. بس بحب أطلب منكم إنكم تخلوا الميكروفونات مسكرة عبين ما نفتح مساحة للسؤال والجواب في آخر نص ساعة من اللقاء. Hello everyone, welcome to the Internet of Things, Another World is Possible, organized by Darat Funun, the Khalid Shoman Foundation. Today, we are lucky to present the resident, to be present actually, with the resident artists Sulaiman Majali, Umar Adel, Bayan Kiwan, and Juliana Fadil Lachkev, who will be speaking about the projects they have developed the past 2 months as part of the Internet of Things online residency program. You can view their projects on our website, and the latest publication we have released, Immune Systems and Antibodies, which is also available for download on our website. Immune Systems and Antibodies is an exercise in online publishing as an artistic and curatorial practice, departing from the state of injury towards reparative presence and a witnessing otherwise. We now consider that this exhibition project has taken its final shape. And so on this occasion, we would like to also thank, in addition to Sliman, Umar, Bayan, and Juliana, the artists who joined us in the first iteration, Tamara Nassar, Ahmed Isam Eddin, and Arish Neti. For this project was built on this incredible collective conversation that each of the artists was a part of. Seeing as we're opening the entire exhibition this evening, we thought we'd go back to its first moments, embodied in the curatorial statement, which we had written back in March at the height of the state of emergency as we have come to know it. The curators will be reading the curatorial statement in Arabic and then in English before we proceed with the artists' presentations. In the meantime, I'm going to ask that you all keep your microphones closed until we open up the space for Q&A in the last half hour of this event. Okay.
إنترنت الأشياء عالم آخر ممكن هو مشروع معرض يتيح مساحة للتساؤل والبحث الجماعي من وبواسطة الحجر. ينتقل المشروع بين الأونلاين والأوفلاين عابراً للمؤقتيات. في ظل حالة الإغلاق التي يشهدها العالم نتيجة الكوفيد-19 أصبح معظم التفاعل البشري محصوراً في الفضاء السبراني، وعلى هذا النحو نجد أنفسنا أكثر عرضة لحكم رأسمالية الاتصال والتكنولوجيا المتقدمة المرتبطة بهشاشة الحضور المنفصل عن الجسد والعالم المادي. لقد أدرك طوباويو الإنترنت سابقاً أنه على الرغم من أن الفضاء السبراني جسد إمكانية التحرر وتشكل الذاتية الراديكالية، إلا أنه كان يخضع في الوقت ذاته لسلطة الأنظمة المهيمنة. وقد أدى الانتشار الرقمي القائم على تنامي رأس المال إلى حالة من التسارع المعلوماتي يصاحبها فقدان للمعنى، محو للمستقبل، أو بعبارة أخرى اختفاء لمستقبل سياسي بديل. وبحسب بودريار انتقل كل شيء إلى العالم الافتراضي، وأصبحنا في مقابل النهاية الافتراضية للعالم. كيف نفكر في التعافي واستعادة الذاتية في سياق هذه الشبكات الهرمية؟ وما هي الطرق التي تتيح مساحة أو تساعدنا في أن نفكر في عوالم أخرى متعددة بلا حدود؟ إنترنت الأشياء هو دعوة للتفكر من موقعنا خلف الشاشات، ولتفكيك الأزمة والبنى الاجتماعية والفضاء السبراني والميمز والقلق والتكنولوجيا والجغرافيا وسياسات الجسد، من البث الحي إلى التغذية الإخبارية، ومن الوسيط وسخطه إلى حالة الطوارئ.
Internet of Things, Another World is Possible is an exhibition project facilitating a collective inquiry from and through the quarantine, navigating online and offline, traversing temporalities. With the world currently on lockdown as a result of the COVID-19, most human interaction has become relegated to cyberspace. As such, we find ourselves increasingly vulnerable to the reign of communicative capitalism and high technology, connected to the precarious state of disembodied presence. The internet utopians realized early on that just as cyberspace embodied the potential for liberation and the formation of radical subjectivity, it was also capable of being taken up by systems of domination. Driven by the expansion of capital, the proliferation of the digital corresponded to the acceleration of the infosphere and the simultaneous designification of the world, a cancellation of the future, or in other words, the disappearance of a radically different political future. Following Baudrillard, everything transposed into the virtual, and we became confronted with a virtual apocalypse. How do we think about recovery and repair in the context of such hierarchical networks? The work of repair that allows for a sense of futurity and/or helps us think other worlds, multiple without boundary. Internet of Things is an invitation for reflecting on the situ from our active positions behind the screens, deconstructing the crisis, contingency, social structures, cyberspace, memes, anxiety, technology, geography, and body politics, live streamed to new speed from the medium and its discontents to the state of emergency. Thank you. We're now going to start with Sulaiman Nabilsi whenever he's ready.
The way the studio inhabits the phone, the computer, the screen, and the lens always feels like a more urgent question than anything to do with the body inhabiting the studio as a workplace or a place at all. Studios have always had a subtle aggression to them for me, always exhausting and numbing, spaces of hyperfocus as much as dissociation. For me, they've never been places where ideas are born. They're more like spaces that ideas are brought into, interrogated as a laboratory in an alchemical kind of way. I struggle and fight to strip and purge the studio of its capitalist distortions, more so these days as the virus does a lot of the uncomfortable revealing for us, it's easier to instigate these kinds of upheavals now. It doesn't mean things can't be produced, just that I've been trying to re-inhabit an understanding of the studio as a place of study, remembering the act of studying as devotional and art as revelatory. Part of the devotional and revelatory in practice for me is that as devices or methods, they work against permitted ways of working and their colonial logics of the particular spatial and temporal locales that these things are to take place in, such as the workplace and money time. It reveals these tensions between the devotional and revelatory that aren't tied permanently to space or language, meanings and their embodiments, centers and their peripheries. Part of problematizing and interrogating this within practice over the past few years has resulted in a move towards the slow production of film. This keeps things abstract at this level of presenting to you and speaking with language as words. I think it also lends itself to the truths of art as always already a speaking and thinking thing that lives in the world and speaks from it. I don't know, recently I think art maybe lives everywhere other than the artwork. Like the artwork can function as a kind of map in this way, and in certain forms makes me question how those diasporic temporal and spatial realms that can be conjured in the membranes of things harbor divergent modes of mapping, a weapon to be deployed in the house of an enduring imperial imaginary, or at least it tends to obstruct and interfere with things as they are. The study and making of scenes years apart insists on practice as a sprawling quantum network and plexus. It feels messy and strangely sustainable, and because of this, I hold it close as a kind of resistance to a pace that we are told to move through. I sent an email today that said, there's something about the demand for the body or face through camera on screen that is constant and relentless and uncomfortable. I think I meant to say there's something stinky and colonial about it. Being before a camera each time we've met in this context is different, but it reinforces this relationship between the screen and the lens. Everything we're doing now is performance before camera. What was locality anyway? And we were always performing, no? I sat in a group of residents once in close proximity, and Emma Woluka-Wanambwa refers to Mikabal and this idea of aesthetics not as beauty in the sense that a thing looks a certain way, but as sensate binding, as felt encounter, a thing that feels a certain way. Edinburgh's rain smashes flat against the window. Then something too about moving image as moving images, like images that move, and moving image as moving images, like images that move us emotionally, secretly, intimately, publicly. Artist and collaborator Kamara Taylor introduced me a while ago to Tina Kamp's idea of listening to images and the haptic connection we have to them, or the haptic connection we have to have to them, with them. Tina asks what it means to encounter images and to look beyond what we can see. I invoke this when writing now because I remember the emphasis on the body in what Kamp speaks about with regard to the image, and it reminds me how I look at landscapes in the same way, especially ones where bodies are absent, even in their presence, like ones that exist in the imaginal too, not just Orientalist paintings, archival photographs, but of the imagined geographies, colonial dreams, the desire lines, grieving and dragged body minds of political landscapes, of the subconscious, psychosis, the jagged rocky terrains of weaponized depression under white supremacy, the slump, the dream and the vision, fugitive geographies, folds of diasporic flesh. These intimate, affective, touching encounters within image, similarly to the ways in which the diasporan garden lives as a site and domain of collapse and folding, is also maybe this meeting place of all the dispersed, the garden, peripheral to the home, is a site of collaterality, simultaneity, and peripherality. The studio, the work, the research have no delineations. A destroyed statue functions as a prelude, gate, or portal, an opening. The video that plays after clicking the bullet hole covered, smashed metallic blue stone face of British Orientalist Edward William Lane, known for his translation of 1001 Nights and the first English-Arabic dictionary, during which he dies at the letter Qaf, is a video work, a scene in which an impossible, shape-shifting protagonist, a ghost, spectre for a collective, lives through the creases and folds of diasporic time. What are they trying to say, to think, to feel? The public domain Desert Rock 7 object file click-through moves us through a window into which things are placed that are slippery to hold and speak, deposited and planted into the earth of the domain in contractions and expansions of research as slips, ruptures, and rifts as modes of transportation and transmutation.
Thank you, Sulaiman. We will now move on to Umar. Umar, you can start whenever you're ready.
Okay. So in the last period, I've been occupied with questions related to hegemony and its manifestation, its institutions, and the turbulences it's going through at the current moment, and also the alternative possibilities in seeing the emancipatory struggle within the existing hegemonic order. At the beginning, I was interested in exploring this idea of hegemony, and then I moved to specifically talking about antagonism and agonism, the concept of agonism that was developed by Chantal Mouffe and Ernesto Laclau in her book. And this was one of the things that one part of the project that I was trying to develop here. But on the other hand, I began also to focus on the condition of intimacy within this hegemony. And by intimacy here, I mean all kinds and forms of intimate human interactions that involves feelings. So when looking at the cyberspace as a space that is increasingly occupying a big part of our daily life activities and communication, especially since the outbreak of the COVID-19, which accelerated or intensified the role of this space, we start to notice that new forms and patterns of communications that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago started to emerge. And with these new forms, there were many perceptual shifts in our own understanding and our way of handling our feelings and communication, which is a very critical situation that is the existing hegemony manifested in its own institution of power, saw an opportunity of seizing this shift and capitalized on it as a new product to be created and get fully integrated into the supply chain. Here, I'm talking about the commodification of feelings as a signature product of the internet nowadays. And this is what I am researching at the moment. What does this mean and how can we read it? Not just in relation to the larger existing structure, but also internally or intimately on an individual level. I was trying in this work that hopefully you have already experienced in the studio. I was interested in exploring how the machine speaks to us as the mediator or the promoter of feelings in the cyberspace. I was interested in observing what kind of vocabulary is being used in this process of commodification. And in this sense, I started to use specific textual elements that formulate the skeleton of the work. These sentences are a hypertext collage that was either collected from or inspired by different online communication. And I attempted here to emphasize the significance of these sentences through a process of deconstructing and reconstructing them in one condensed space and create what seems like a click-through advert or a game.
Thank you, Sliman. Omar, sorry. Okay, now we move on to Bayan and Juliana. Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
We need to share a screen. Yes, ma'am. That screen. That one. This one? Yes, this one. All right. Do you want to start? Sure. We will talk about this a little more informally than reading a text. So our Open Studio is a memory theater. We borrowed this form from Giulio Camillo, who used it as a device for memorizing, but we kind of appropriated it to use it to kind of comment on the futility of trying to respond to this moment or even remember or relate to what is going on within our surroundings, particularly in New York City in the United States.
Yeah, I think when we started talking about open studios and like an online platform, since the two of us don't really have a background in that, I think we were thinking more of the open studio as a like on the website as a place that of accumulation that culminates in the exhibition and it isn't like a reveal of some other thing other than what was being accumulated during the residency. We had initially at the start of this planned something very different and more centered, but this residency began almost simultaneously with the uprisings, and this summer has been filled with overwhelming stimuli.
And I think maybe we can go to the text.
Do you want to?
Yes. So I'll start here and then I'll go back and go through different things. Are you going to read?
Yeah. Clutter is a sound. In an excess of less, a consolation of movement, I remove material in spurs of abandonment, remedying attachment. An exercise in forgetting, in rootlessness. No material evidence of an existing past, no remains present to be forgotten for a bearable new future. Objects break and already invisible images disappear. All of our information is in the sun. Light, the sun and screen alike. Mirror, the moon, and glitter. Clutter is sculpture. It is mass and space. Space is room, is page. Space is surface, is nook, is desktop, is public, is mind, is screen, and what's before and behind it. Space is too thin to hold all of this. Clutter takes up space. Clutter makes more space. I first encountered my room in a screen, smaller standing in its doorway, bigger in the corner, smaller painting the doors white, bigger introducing a mirror, a lamp, another, filling more time by filling more space and finding more room the more things move in. Clutter is a portal. Decluttering always risks losing stories. Every perfume bottle a gift, empty scents, lingering gateways. Clutter is archive, is not trying to be profound or coherent, drawing in the chaos of unprecedented times, no detail too little or too much, accumulating emotion and evidence of a temporary other world to remember the possibility of another.
these racist police!
So I think one important thing about this too, the memory theater, is that we're kind of constructing an archive rather than maybe making a response to work. And the archive is supposed to be unreadable. So the astrological, the astrological symbols at the bottom of the memory theater, for example, kind of call to like how astrology is always already ambiguous, re-emphasize this, and those were in the original memory theater existed. And then another thing that was important too was that with the memory theater, as the user or the person using the memory theater, you're actually on the stage looking out into the audience. So this work then changes depending on who the viewer is and how they approach it. So if you're approaching it and you click, Saturn in screens first, then like at that intersection of the two, then you're gonna have a different experience of the work than someone who chooses Mars and glitter first, for example.
So the intersections are a form of meaning making. And then I think it is more an act resembling the angel of history, in that it sifts through things and doesn't have time to really sit with it. And I think the form here also mimics that.
Yeah. So like the video that we just played, where it says Black Lives Matter in the street, is actually made up of the debris from a burnt police van, NYPD police van. And so like how these kind of debris then construct other things. And of course we didn't make that just exists. But we're thinking similarly about like picking up the pieces and sifting through them and finding ways to kind of organize information. And that is our project. Thank you.
Thank you, Bayan and Juliana. Thank you, all of you, Sulaiman, Omar, and Juliana and Bayan. This was really, really beautiful. We're now going to move on to a group conversation about each of the works, but also the general like conceptual framework of this project. And then we're gonna open up the floor for some questions and answers. So if any of you would like to ask a question, please type it down in the chat box, or otherwise turn on your microphone and ask the question. So we're gonna start the first round with a reflection, maybe a group reflection, on how each of these works were conceptualized within the context of a state of emergency, crisis, and in response to capitalist cyberspace. So maybe we can like start with Sulaiman, move on to Omar, and then finally Juliana and Bayan again.
Sure. I guess it's kind of difficult to, I guess, like contextualize the work after the reading this like performance or text work, I suppose, is everything that I want to say. But I also struggle a bit with like this idea of capitalist cyberspace as like a distinct, like different space to the one that we're in now, like now here, but now here, or like I'm not sure what's real anymore, or like what, do you know what I mean, what's online, what's offline right now, whatever. But yeah, I think like something about that question also implies that this is a state of emergency and crisis, and I think something that I always try to do is kind of remember that it's always been a state of emergency and crisis. So like, I guess something I've been thinking about so much with others on my own is the virus as like a kind of revelatory force, you know, something that's actually revealed states of emergencies and crises, as opposed to creating one, if that makes sense. And kind of off on that tangent too, I think like, I think of Mark Fisher when I hear like capitalist cyberspace and da-da-da. So another thing that I've been thinking too is how the virus, Mark Fisher essentially speaks about these three, well, he's saying that capitalism has got to that extent where we can't see anything other than capitalism on this horizon. And he kind of talks about a horizon. And he speaks about three main things that might be able to push against this kind of domination of capitalism in our lives, in our minds, our conceptions of the future. And it's green critique and mental health and bureaucracy. And I think like actually the virus has done something really interesting where it's like, and this has informed the work, I suppose, in an abstract way. But the virus has kind of hit all these three targets of like collapsing this bureaucratic way of like simulating productivity, or like being productive people and going to work or whatever, and is now, or like will do, or whatever will kind of has created, is revealing this mental health crisis, which is another kind of like obstruction or like interference, right, into the way that capitalism does this kind of colonizing of the horizon. And green critique, the way that it's kind of halted things. I think like the work always emerges from the time that it's made in, and it's been interesting like talking with other artists about you know, what's been going on in the respective places that we're in relation to the virus and the uprisings, and like the way that the work is kind of like jumping from these things. So yeah, like I don't know how I would talk about, you know, that in relation to that, because for me it's like the work speaks and I want the work to do the speaking. But these are the things on my head, in my mind right now. And I suppose the same with the futures thing is that actually, like, I don't know, I think the work, actually the video work that you encounter after clicking through also kind of touches on those things that Fisher speaks about with the horizon. Like there's a flash at the end of the film with a sunrise. And these things aren't intentional. I guess I'm rereading the work because I think that's always interesting to do, but this kind of sunrise at the end. But there's also this sense of like losing identity. I think one of the narrators in the video work speaks about this sense of losing your identity, losing a sense of identity, which I would definitely relate to. I don't know who says it. I think about postmodernism. It's like breaking down of that not knowing who we are anymore under capitalism. I think is something that's present in the work, always like trying to locate this central figure that is slippery, and you can never really understand like who this is. It the butterfly? Is it the voice speaking? Or like what? I'll leave it at that because I'll just.
Omar, would you like to elaborate on this? And maybe Omar also taking into account the previous conversation that you might like that you initiated as part of your workshop on agonism, and sort of tying that conversation to these reflections.
Yeah. I actually was planning to
yeah.
Because it's very much, I think the first part, like the part that's related to how we see it with the future part, like the part that's related to the future, for me, it exists in this attempt to reread our relationship to the struggle, or to try to redefine the struggle in a larger sense with the system. And I was trying to do that by looking at the concept of agonism that Chantal Mouffe developed. And for me, this is an attempt to see a potential in actually what is going on at the moment, and to make use of it in a way for another possibility in the future. Not necessarily that we will turn to a utopia or anything, but then just being aware, and this is the whole thing related to agonism actually, is being aware of that the existing hegemony is a constructed thing, and by being aware of that already means that the possibility of changing it is there, and just waiting for us to find a way to try to do that. So I think the part that's related to the future is related to this conversation that I was trying that I did initiate during the workshop, or not the talk or the session that I did 2 weeks ago, I think. And I was interested in specifically also the context, since also every context is very specific and very special to its frame. is not to generalize anything, but I was interested in this session on the existing situation of the art institution in the region. And is there a something that is happening in these institutions now? What kind of narrative that they are adopting? Is there a narrative actually or not? And yeah, then this is the part that's related to the future, and it's very specific to this point. And on the other hand, the relationship to the capitalist system, it's still continuing to the same idea, but then yeah, the definition of hegemony here comes into play. Because yeah, the existing system is the existing hegemonic structure that we are going through. And this hegemony is not only existing in the physical space, it's also existing in the cyberspace. Now, as I was reading earlier today, now it's more pressing the presence of the cyberspace in our life because of the virus. But then I look like I'm changing my mind recently about the use of the term crisis, actually. And I am seeing it as that we are the crisis for the capitalism. Because what the system is trying to do is trying to maintain its own business as usual, is trying to maintain its own existing as it was before, and it's trying to recuperate with what's happening because of the virus, because the virus came and it changed everything, not because the system wanted that. So that we can think of the virus is a catalyst, and we are the crisis, and the system is in crisis now. That this is something that I find it's maybe we can think about this as coming from this agonistic perspective of seeing a struggle and seeing a potentiality of seizing this moment and responding back basically to what is going on now. So yeah, and specifically in relation to the work, I'm interested in this, the presence of intimacy or feelings, and what is its status between all of that, because we keep on talking, we are thinking constantly about the system and the institution and the organization, like the general and the bigger picture of the thing, and even about us as a group. But on the individual sense, on
Omar, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
We can hear you.
I can hear you
now.
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah. I mean, from my part.
Me too.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Quite well.
I muted and unmuted again. Yeah, so maybe this is a sign. We can move on and then come back later. But yeah, just like shortly about in relation to the work, I was thinking of yeah, this how this space is being taking a big part in our life, specific intimately, and how we are how is the system is trying to use this situation in its own benefit, and how we can respond, or how we can be aware basically of the specific vocabulary and language that the system is using or implanting in a specific thing like that. And yeah.
Thank you, Ahmed. Juliana and Bayan.
Yes. Hello.
Okay.
I'm just thinking about how we're in the dark now too, and like this thinking about screens.
But if you guys can raise your voices a little bit.
Well, so a lot of what we were dealing with our project was like sources and reflections of light, and thinking about the screen as a portal. And so I was thinking about how like now we're in the dark because the sun went behind the clouds, so I think it's like kind of like this like thing where it's like you have something that's unavoidable, like the internet. So like we were so like
Resistant at the start.
Yeah. And you know, usually work very materially, like each of us in our own practices. And so but it's kind of like this like this idea of like a pharmacon, which is like a poison and medicine, right? So it's like where like the screens have been like such a important way of like connecting with other people at this point in time, but at the same time they're also, and we've known this for as long as the internet has existed probably, is like that they're also a way of like taking our information and using it to sell us things and track us and etc.
And thinking of the memory theater particularly, it is something that was made like way before, and before Camillo died, he anticipated a different future that will be able to put into effect his work. And then the memory theater is very integral to computers and interfaces and
But it's interesting because right after he died, it became obsolete because they invented the printing press. So you didn't need to memorize things anymore. But then now with the internet, it became, and Frances Yates also, I guess, popularized it in her book, The Art of Memory. But with the internet, it's been really integral to creating interfaces because you have, you know, a bunch of windows or chairs in the theater audience, right? That then take you to different, you can enter and they take you to different places.
Thank you. Maybe we can take a few questions from everyone who's present with us today. So if you guys would like to ask a question, like I said before, you can either type it down below in the chat box or just turn on your microphone and go ahead, pitch in.
Maybe I could say something before, or
sure.
People they prepare something. No, I was just mostly like thinking about the three like projects by Sulaiman, Omar, Bayan, and Juliana, and yeah, I was thinking about this idea since like we've like or kind of there was like this intention to, in this exhibition project, Internet of Things and Other Worlds Possible, to focus on its two iterations on those two parts of the title. And in this part, we're more focusing on this idea of the future, the another world, the possibility of it. And yeah, like try to figure out maybe where we are and what's gonna come next or whatever. Yeah, I was thinking about this idea of the future a lot. And in these three projects, like I can see a lot of like these connections in between poetry as a solution, or not solution, maybe it's like a radical tactic to maneuver on yeah, like yeah, to maneuver around this structures wherein, I don't want to say capitalist structure or whatever, or colonial, it's like this whole thing that goes up like beyond it. And then this memory theater, because we've been also talking about it like the last couple of months, like on this like why memory theater, but then like talking about actually things that they were literally happening now, and every week feels like so far away, but it's actually just the last week. And there was like these events that like one day, and then the day after there is something totally new going on, and the whole world is shifting attention somewhere else. And then what happened yesterday, it become I mean, it's a past, but it become like a long time past kind of thing. And then with Omar, like with hint, do you hear me now? And this research on I don't know, on both sides, like machines of intimacy and agonism. I was thinking a lot about this subjectivity, like how, like if machines have this subjectivity and they are not, like they are evolving, and I don't know, like there is this thing with evolutionary algorithms, for example, like this could be something more real in the future. I mean, it's happening, but it's, of course, it's still, it's it's still baby algorithms, let's say. It's still learning, the deep learning processes, but yeah, in general, like I see like these connections on all of the 3 projects, like on trying to imagine and think this time frame that is, I don't know, the future or the past or the now, because it's kind of imploded in empty time. And that's what I want to go back to with this idea of after the future. Especially, of course, like Franco before Berardi was working on it a lot, and of course also Mark Fisher. But this thing, this idea of after the future and this imaginative future, because like I don't know, like in culture and art and mostly in science fiction, actually, was the future was always imagined, and actually most of this future that we imagined, we're living now, and it was all coming from this science fiction literature and films, etc., from the 80s. And then I don't know, until maybe like the year 2000, and after that there was, of course, there was this massive crash, or should be a crash, but then there was no crash, with this millennium bug that, I don't know, the computers will not manage to change 2 digits from 99 to 00, which is the year 00, the 2000. But then we passed that moment of time, because that was an empty time, and these machines, they couldn't really realize, or the idea was that these machines, or many of them, they will not realize it, and then the banking system will collapse, and of course everything is connected to it. But then, like, living in this after the future moment, where actually everything happened, everything was imagined in the science fiction literature mostly, it's already happening. Screen, I don't know, like touch screens, all this idea of facial recognition and biometrics, and I don't know, drones, Amazon, like with these services to do drones services deliveries, and of course also with Mars and space exploration missions. That also, of course, we've been talking about also during this iteration, with many works and many contributions from artists and writers and in this iteration, but specifically with this project with Aaron Illeray, where he played, and actually he did this Let's Play form to go literally to Mars. And then a week after, there was this HOPE mission from United Arab Emirates. Yeah, like this whole survival narrative. And okay, we are now in this moment of time that we're kind of stuck. I mean, of course, we're not really stuck, we're moving, but as historical moment, this virus, of course, like throw us like radically into the cyberspace, where actually this IRL equals URL in a very radical way. There is no like you cannot distinguish between what is in the screen and what is in outside. I don't even like, sometimes even like, I don't know, watching something on Netflix could kind of, which is like super fictional, kind of overlap with, because I'm using the same laptop to maybe watch something like, I don't know, fictional thing, and then I'm having a conversation with, I don't know, one of my friends or something, you know, and then you have a birthday parties and which is like super intimate thing also to attend. It's not like, so yeah, I don't know, like it was more just a comment, and to more like go around these, basically these 3 works and researches actually, but also like this whole idea that we've kind of, yeah, we tried to really get into it with this second part of the title with the another world is possible. That also, of course, like I just want to mention it again. I mentioned like we've been talking about it before, but just for the new people who are attending here, that another world is possible is actually coming from this like social movement slogan from the 70s. And it was really popularized mostly in or a lot in Latin America, and then of course with the Zapatistas in Mexico, where these radical leftist ideas and coming from anti-authoritarian areas to try to imagine this another world. And of course it's kind of hopeful, but of course it's also including a lot of struggles. But now with this moment, we're trying to bring this title again, but also to kind of push it into another direction, or not another direction, actually to go further with the meaning that it carries. Yeah.
Thanks. We have a question actually from Dakhil. So Dakhil is saying, since the statements are perhaps very close and tackle related questions, I'd be interested to know if there were any discussions, exchanges happening between the artists and how you guys relate to each other's works.
I mean, we like as residents met with you guys, right? And kind of, which didn't feel like formal conversations. And actually the residents planned to get together outside of those set times, and we didn't manage to. So like, no, we didn't, you know, it's like, I think this is what I was kind of trying to say really badly was that I think the reason why everything is so close is because we're in such a shared moment that feels, I mean, in some ways really shared, but in some ways it's really, you know, yeah, I mean, it all emerges from the same kind of situation.
And I think also too, I mean, I don't know, to me it feels like that the two of us and this particularly you, Suleiman, like really latched on to the garden thing in the first readings that we did have a discussion about as a group. So there were some like materials and things that we did like collectively share, and we did have some discussions, but yeah, I think a lot of the similarities speak to like the way in which this particular moment has like collapsed space, and it feels like everything's happening in the same time everywhere, but also differently as well,
like specific
with
nuances.
specific, yeah.
Share the same idea basically, but I think also the conversation we had, because yeah, we met every 2 weeks with the curators, and we were talking about our project, we were giving feedback to each other, and I think this also, like, regardless of that there is a direct relationship in the work or not, there is the commonality of what's going on and what we are living through, all of us. So there is like an unconscious or like an indirect relationship, not necessarily, if it's not like there directly, like in the garden thing, for example, or then there is something related to the commonality that we are going through also. So so yeah, I would say that there was a lot that was being shared. It was some intense conversation we had.
Thank you, Ahmed. We have another question from Ashari. Maybe you can read it.
Okay, Asha, actually it's a question for you, Ahmed.
Yeah.
She says, I have a question for you, Ahmed, in relation to your inquiries and mulling over emotions and intimacy within the context of hegemony. There is a tendency to consider fear in fictional and non-fictional contexts as an emotional element existing between
a hegemon.
A hegemon and those affected by its influence, and even its existence between affected individuals or communities. I wanted to see if what ideas about intimacy were most striking for you during this time, and how intimacy might help us understand this fear.
This is a very good question.
Wow. Thank you.
Nice one, Asha.
Okay, so I start from, yeah, I wanted to see if what ideas about intimacy were most striking for you during this. Well, yeah, what I was saying, it's interesting that you bring the notion of, or like the feeling of fear into the conversation. I didn't think about it, or not think about it. Fears is very specific feeling, and it exists in different, and in different ways on so many different levels. Not just in relationship to the system, but it's an internalized thing too. But the thing that for me that was very much striking is that on the process of trying to transmit our intimate interaction or our intimate gestures in our way of projecting our feelings outside of us, using these platforms and these social media, using these dating apps, using all of these spaces that is mainly created to create and facilitate an intimate or an intimate environment. But on the way of doing that, there is a lot of reproduction of ourselves that happens in this process. And for me, this was the most striking things, because at a certain moment, sometimes these intimate gestures or intimate actions become empty, that it doesn't achieve, it's not anymore achieving its own purpose of reaching the other or being in contact with the other, as much as it's more of a like an empty action that we do, and it become like a product that we consume. So we consume in this sense our feeling. And our feeling, by that I mean like all kinds of feelings. It's not just intimacy in the sense of like love, partner, love relationship, and this kind of intimate connection, but all forms of communication between us and our friends, our family, our colleagues, our lovers too. And for me, this was the most striking aspect, because to a certain degree we don't really I don't want to generalize, but to a larger extent we are not aware so much of what happened throughout this process, because it is so gigantic, it's so enormous, it's occupying everywhere around us, that is become harder to see beyond it, and become harder to see another possibility of it. And this is something that is related to how hegemony function also. It always tries to convince you in so many ways that this way is the only way, or it is the way. It is this is how life it is, not a representation of what this system is trying to do. And about I don't know if I answered your question properly or all of it, but the part that is related to this time and how intimacy might help us understand this fear. Good point. I don't know how, but I think because also when we connect this idea of intimacy also to democracy, which or like deliberative democracy, that it's like basically creating consensual like consensus. Like, we should put away our feelings and be rational to think about like to whom we should vote, and work on creating this fictional harmonious society that will be based on like where we agree together on things. So I think what I was trying to do, or what I am interested in here, is that to give a space to claim back our feelings, because in a way it feels like it's stripped away, including the fear. Like even the fear is not. It's not. We. You know, there's something related to how the system is trying to steal away the vocabularies of expressing what we feel.
Mm-hmm.
And this also including, it includes fear, it includes oppression, it includes discrimination, it includes all of these vocabularies that we use. And I think what I'm trying to do here is to claim back, or like to try to bring back attention to this aspect of feelings and intimacy and our intimate self, or our like not always to think in abstraction of our relationship to the system, but also to think of it as individuals who have needs, who have feelings too, and try to read how the existing environment around us, which is like in this specific context here, I'm thinking about the internet and the cyberspace, how this context is actually affecting this aspect. So maybe in this way, fear can be included. However, there is a kind of specificity for fear, I think, that maybe maybe this would need a larger and longer conversation. But yeah, I will take this. Actually, I would keep this question with me afterwards.
This may be on like a tangent way, but I feel like in relation to this question, I think even outside of the cyberspace, just thinking about how as soon as the pandemic hit, at least with roommates, and like how intimacy changed form almost immediately, where everything becomes like it is an act of care, but it is also a sort of surveillance of like like being very transparent about the movement and contact, and
like who you're seeing, how you're getting there, how many people are going to be there, are they wearing masks, are they washing their hands, etc.
Did you use the public bathroom?
Yeah. And actually, this made me remember. Actually, one of the pages on my studio, that you have like this the definition of FOMO, the fear of missing out. Just like that, this is one of the fears that we are constantly having, I think, because of because there's a lot of things that's happening around us, and actually this is one of the sentences that these apps are using that they are like using using this idea that you should be afraid of missing out things, so you should join, and as if it's like a motivational thing. You know, it was like it's a bit absurd in a way, but yeah.
Would anyone else like to jump in with a question? Okay, maybe we can.
Actually, I had a question. I had a question in mind for Suleiman, because as Jude mentioned earlier, like while we were working on your text, especially like the first time we read your text, The Assembly of the Dispersed, I felt that there was like some kind of poetics that were super intimate. Like speaking of intimacy, they were super intimate, and they were super close to my heart as well. So I wanted to ask you about them, and like, how do you approach poetics, and like, is it your way of coping with the current moment, or like,
with life, yeah. I think again, there's this kind of contradiction. I guess we're all contradictions, and I think that has to be okay. But like one of the biggest contradictions for me is how I guess poetics can sometimes become so abstract that it's this kind of depoliticizing force, right? It can kind of like strip anything of its political kind of being, which is disturbing, because it's like, for me, that's a really difficult thing to do. To depoliticize something is almost impossible. So I think on the one hand, poetry is kind of different, but it's poetics, right? But like, anyway, generally, like, poetics can be used to evade a kind of directness that maybe is like needed, is important, but somewhere between that and its contradictory or complementary thing that it exists with is like an ability to infiltrate, or like kind of, I always have this image of the Trojan horse, right? Like how you can say something in however little amount of words that might take you thousands of words to say otherwise. So like how one word can carry with it 10 or 20 words, you know? It's like there's something kind of, I don't want to say powerful because there's issues with that word in this context, but there's something like active about poetry that I think language doesn't. I don't have that relationship with language unless it's poetic, like, anyway. And I think I include language to mean like the image or object or space or whatever, kind of, not just art either. But yeah, I think for me, like, first and foremost, poetics in the work is a strategy to, I mean, with an understanding that practice for me is this kind of scientific almost way of like experimenting, like how do we map futures? How do we carve out a kind of possibility of other ways of being and living? So I guess poetics is a strategy or like a methodology to disrupt this kind of narrative-driven idea of lots of things, what it means to be an artist, what it means to be a racialized person in the UK. Like, there are different levels of how it can be deployed, but I think for me it's a kind of weapon. I'm interested in the studio, whatever the studio it might be, like in how we can build weapons. I mean that in like, not like arms, like actual weapons, but poetically speaking, like weapons that we can use to disrupt or to whatever we need to do. You know, I think like poetry lives for very long, and I think poetry lives, survives, like not lives necessarily. I think someone can survive if it's dead too, but poetry survives. And I'm interested, not because I want to be interested in survival, but because being who I am in this location, geographically, politically, socially, requires survival. Yeah, so it's the way I cope with life, I guess, and actually I think we all do. Like, I don't think it's something I choose to, you know what I mean? I think we all inhabit that world of poetry. Just that things maybe require us to be more concise or like more clear about what we're doing and what we're saying, how we're feeling, you know? If that makes sense. I don't know if it makes.
Thank you, Sulaiman. Actually, I have a question for all of you that sort of builds on that. So I wanted to ask you all a question in reference to the publication that we released today, that was very much based on all of your works, immune systems and antibodies, which departs from the state of injury, right? So the state of injury in a metaphorical sense, but also in a very material sense. But also building on the conversations that we had earlier on embodiment and what that means, and a new ontology of embodiment. So I wanted to ask you how you all relate or grapple with the bodily and the visceral and the precarious bodily and visceral in each of your projects. And perhaps this could be approached differently based on what you guys have worked on. For example, Sulaiman, the exiled body under white supremacy, you spoke a lot about the effective consequences of that. Umar, in relation to intimacy, Bayan and Juliana, you grappled with that in so many different ways, be it by looking at how our bodies are under surveillance, the effects of the mask, and so on. That's a question for all of you.
I think we could maybe start. Because I think that the first thing that we were thinking of was the body being in many different places at once, and thinking about that also in relationship to like a diasporic existence as well, which was something that we were talking about earlier this morning, of like just how a body is always in multiple places at once, or not really there but trying to be there
in like more material definitions, like being here but also being in Amman and in Abu Dhabi at the same time. And yeah, I think one other thing in relation to the body was thinking of it as a site of abundance during this time, as being your dwelling and your everything at the same time, and being
and being like kind of like, what can the body do, and how can bodies coming together in ways that are material or immaterial, so like materially in the internet or in the screen, but also materially in public spaces, in protest, and the kinds of change that by the enactment or the embodiment, like the kinds of change that can make, and the way in which the performance of the body in these ways like is almost like a rehearsal or an enactment of possibilities for another world.
Dare we say a metaphor of contagion?
Yes.
Suleiman, Omar.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I guess you already, in almost all of my work, I mean, I come from a sculptural background too. I don't know if that comes through or if that even needs to be said, but for me, and this is interesting too, because I think I'm maybe more used to speaking about like art very materially. So there's always, by default, like as a kind of precondition of like the artwork, there's always this kind of physicality or like intimacy with things. But yeah, I guess conceptually, yeah, like the affective consequences of living under these structures comes through, but also it kind of goes back to this question of fear and intimacy. Also, it's like the work wanting to understand and wanting to speak about intimacy as a micropolitical, as a space, and what that means, and the kind of implications of how we perform politics in those intimate spaces. And I don't just mean maybe like between people, but the work, I think, tries to kind of like nest itself in that membrane of like how to be like affectively overwhelming actually at points, and like these moments of like cutting that are quite violent in video works, for instance, I think is like an attempt for the work to speak, to like think with people. And I think for me that's very much like a bodily thing, but in terms of like the body in a kind of more visceral way, I think things kind of pixelate and become a bit more abstract, because I'm not sure in the work pixelate. Yeah, I don't know. It depends from thing to thing, and I think the work that I've made for this on this residency has been something that's quite like intuitive. I've kind of worked really intuitively, and I think I've needed to like process stuff, you know, through the work. So actually, I need to also like look at the work and be like, what have I done? What have I made? What is it saying about these things?
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I want to just add something like short for this. Yeah, for this displacement. I don't know, like displacement maybe of the body. I'm not sure, but like it's. I think like it's just a personal experience. I guess I share it also with a lot of people. But talking about the body and being out of place, and out of place and sometimes out of time. No, like for, as I don't know, a reference to Edward Said also. But course, like there was the Nakba, but here maybe it's another Nakba, I'm not sure. But anyway, like talking about like video games, when you experience like, I don't know, like now, especially like the last 3 years or something, like video games have developed really rapidly, like especially with the story building and characters. And you are, I mean, when you play these video games, like you enter these characters so heavily that you become one after like, I don't know, 3-4 hours of playing. And then you start to get involved actually emotionally with this character, and you die also, you know, like you die, you live, you take care of your car, you have, of course, like it existed before, like with, I don't know, with games like Another Life, and these are like more the analog internet kind of thing. But also now it exists like with games like, I don't know, I mean, GTA and Red Dead Redemption and many more. But like these characters, they become so much involved in your life that even when you sleep, you dream. In your dream, you are basically that character you are playing in that video game. Like you are not the same person in real life. You are actually becoming like that character, and becoming that character in your own dream, and dreaming about, okay, like you know, like you are in another even space that you live in during playing these video games. And especially now, of course, like where it's like you have a very heavy character, and you know, this thing that says like it looks real, it's so true to be 3D, or you know, like these kind of thing, like sayings that people are saying, like with this video games that are developed so heavily that the water flow, I don't know, the trees, you feel the wind, and especially if you are playing it with the 4K monitors, then it gets even more intense, no? But yeah, just like small thought on this.
I mean, I dreamed of walking into folders and websites. Talk about not only like the body, but also how that kind of spatiality also gets internalized by our unconscious. Yeah. We actually have one last question from Akshay, and then we have to close. Akshay, if you want to, you can just turn on your microphone and ask it directly yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I was just kind of curious about what Faraz had said about, I guess, like different types of technologies and how these things are kind of being adopted by these big companies, these big governments to do different things. He had mentioned the drones with Amazon, all these things, right? And I also thought about like how the military here in the US at least seems to be like kind of selling all this kind of equipment to local police departments to use against protesters, all these things, right? And we saw also just kind of in the past how, you know, with the US and USSR, they both kind of tried to, you know, kind of test out ways to use nuclear weapons for, I guess, like non-war activities, right? So I mean, this is a very vague thing to say, I guess, and it's probably very Western centric, but I guess I'm curious if you all have any opinions about just kind of how like the military kind of forms technologies, and how that kind of maybe those are in some ways maybe like sent down the pipe in some ways, I guess, right? I don't know if this makes sense, but like, and how that maybe impacts futurity and this idea of this next world that is possible, if you want to call it that.
This was like something we talked about though at the very beginning. And also it's kind of really hard not to have a conversation about the internet and not be Western centric, considering that it was invented by like Western military technologies, and then colonized the world. So but I don't know if I have an answer, and I don't know if you have an answer. Just wanted to validate you. It's okay.
I think something interesting happened here in the UK. I think it was a couple of years ago. There was an advert for a British telecoms company, and they claimed that Britain invented the internet. And there was like, it wasn't quite a lawsuit, but it was this big hoo-ha about like whatever America invented, who invented the internet later. And it was really interesting because actually people had to make this distinction between the World Wide Web and the internet as we know it, and like why military technology kind of accelerated what we know as the internet, but actually the World Wide Web existed, was like a precursor, or like, you know, it wouldn't exist without the other. But so, and I guess it's not an answer to, but actually it makes me think about whatever this is in practice that I talk about, like radical remembering, what it means to try and remember. Maybe it's like more important or like linked to this idea of imagining a future and like what that means for building a future, is like remembering histories that exist kind of under those histories. So like, what if we omit that detail that actually the internet wasn't, you know, things are cloudy, things are more complex, like it's military technology, but what happened before that? Like, where did that come from? And like, what does that mean then for the way that we narrate the thing? And the way that we name the thing maybe has an impact on how we move that forward into the future, you know? So it's not an answer, but I think about that kind of thing a lot.
Yeah, I think now that you're saying that, I'm like thinking about like cybernetics and like how cybernetics is like a precursor to the internet, and people like Sylvia Wynter, who's like an amazing Black feminist scholar. She's a cyberneticist, and how she draws these histories very rhizomatically and like piece together in order to do kind of what you were saying, Suleiman, like a radical remembering. It's like using these like pieces of the past to build new possibilities for the future. And sometimes maybe that's even an understanding of like, what is the category of human, or etc.
It also makes me think of coffee and like the history of coffee. I did these workshops on coffee, and like, I guess I made like a weird claim, but I stick by it actually. I think coffee, or the coffee house, was like a proto-internet. It was like maybe a kind of internet before the internet, like a way that information was passed in this kind of intense way. But at the same time also became this hyper-surveilled space, like the coffee house became this space of like, naturally, wherever information is shared, it's like, it becomes this space of resistance, I guess. Which is reminding me of Paul Mason saying actually that information is the thing that can overwhelm capitalism, which is really odd. But anyway, yeah, like it makes me think of coffee. It makes me think of coffee in that way of like, okay, the plant exists already, right? But it's used the way it was used, and its involvement in like military campaigns, the way that coffee came into Europe in Vienna through this, like the Ottomans leaving the coffee and no one knowing what the coffee was. Like they think it's camel feed, but actually it's like coffee. And the ambassadors like, hey, I can make this clear. Just this kind of history of things, the way that coffee was banned in Europe as a Muslim drink or whatever, you know. So yeah, I don't know. It's so like,
you know, like also like because we were talking now on technologies as like these tools, no, but also like the culture that internet culture in general is also being I don't know, like internet culture apps, all this stuff, no? And even this idea of the Eurocentric perspective of things is kind of fluid a bit now, since also there is shifting of powers, you know, like with China, with, I don't know, I mean, United Arab Emirates now with the space exploration program, with TikTok. I mean, TikTok is like a very simple teenagers app becomes like a space for two things. First is actually the surveillance that China is basically using this app for collecting information, etc. But also then the other part that has to do with actually circulating right-wing ideas, on TikTok, and it's like impressive how much it goes. And the other thing also like memes, I mean memes, it didn't exist like 10 years ago, and I mean of course it existed, but it didn't take that shape in this political and cultural aspect of it until Barack Obama actually used memes to promote himself. Of course, that was the liberal part, but then Trump used it heavily to promote actually another direction of it. But of course, there was like also this very intense usage for memes from the right wing, mostly like promoters, let's say, on Reddit, on many other spaces, in 4chan, and etc. So yeah, like I want to just go back to this idea that Amani Abu Rahma was talking about. That technology doesn't mean also this metal and computers with screen technology. It could be the language. It could be to go back to the very root of what is technology actually is. Yeah, it was just like this short thought I wanted to add.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm gonna thank Bayan, Juliana, Suleiman, and Amar again for the incredible past 2 months. While this exhibition has opened, the conversation does not end. So we will be back with all of you in September. I'm gonna take this final 1 minute to also again remind you that we have released the publication Immune Systems and Antibodies, and that it's available for download on our website. So please do check it out. In addition to artworks by the resident artists, we have an article by Amani Abu Rahma on the necropolitics of BLM, the incumbent Palestinian context, and COVID-19, as well as an article by Karim Stefan on repair, relation, and opacity in an age of telepresence. So do check it out. Also make sure to visit the studios of the artists, and see you all in September. Have a lovely night. Thank you.
Do we leave or we stay? Right?
Do we leave? Yeah, it's always.
He left us. So.
I suppose that Reem will close the chat.
You know, this after like at the end of the event, after
party.
Yes, you know, these like side talks. And